It was a typical evening at one of the city's most luxurious restaurants, a place where the rich and influential gathered to enjoy gourmet meals and exquisite wines. The restaurant, known for its elegant decor and classy atmosphere, looked like something out of a movie. Soft golden lighting made the whole room feel warm and welcoming, while the faint sound of classical music played in the background. The dining area was spacious with tall windows that gave a view of the city lights twinkling in the distance. The walls were decorated with beautiful paintings, and the tables were set with sparkling crystal glasses, fine china, and elegant silverware. Every corner of the restaurant seemed carefully designed to make the customers feel special, as if they were part of a world where luxury and comfort were the only rules. The air smelled of freshly baked bread and delicious food, filling the space with a cozy, indulgent feel. Among the guests that evening was a millionaire businessman named Richard Harrington. He was a regular at this restaurant, always accompanied by his friends or business partners, laughing loudly, sharing jokes, and enjoying the finest food money could buy. Richard was well known in the city, not just for his wealth, but also for his love of challenges. He enjoyed testing people in unexpected ways, often pushing them out of their comfort zones just to see how they would react. People in the restaurant often whispered about his wild, unpredictable nature, but they couldn't help but admire him as well. Richard had a way of making people feel like they were part of something exciting, even if that something was just a game he had invented on the spot. That night, Richard was seated at a large round table near the center of the room. His friends were gathered around him, all wearing expensive suits and laughing at whatever joke he had just told. Richard had a commanding presence, his tall frame and sharp features drawing attention without even trying. His expensive watch glinted under the lights, and his confident, almost playful expression made it clear that he was in charge of the evening's mood. The other diners occasionally glanced at his table, clearly aware of the wealthy man's reputation for causing a stir. Meanwhile, the waitstaff moved quietly between tables, ensuring everything was perfect for the guests. One of the servers, a young woman named Lily, moved from table to table with a polite smile on her face. She had been working at the restaurant for a few months, trying to save up enough money to finish her college degree. Despite the fine surroundings and the rich clientele, Lily wasn't intimidated. She had grown up in a small town and was used to working hard, whether it was cleaning, studying, or dealing with difficult customers. She had a natural confidence that came from knowing how to handle whatever life threw at her. Lily's job at the restaurant wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and she was grateful for it. She enjoyed interacting with customers, though most of them didn't pay much attention to her. She was just another waitress to them, a person who brought their food and refilled their glasses. But tonight was different. As she approached Richard's table, she could feel his eyes on her. He was watching her closely, studying her every move, and a flicker of curiosity seemed to cross his face. Richard was known for his love of playful challenges, and as Lily approached with a fresh round of drinks for the table, he didn't waste a second. With a casual smile, he turned to her and asked, "Can you play the piano?" Lily froze for a moment. She wasn't sure if he was joking or serious, but she had learned early on not to back down from a challenge. She gave him a nervous smile and replied, "I can, but it's been a long time." The entire table went quiet for a moment. The guests at Richard's table looked at each other, intrigued by the challenge. Lily, caught off guard but not wanting to seem unprepared, felt a mix of excitement and anxiety rise within her. She had played the piano as a child, but hadn't touched the keys in years. Still, she wasn't one to shy away from a challenge, especially in front of a crowd. Richard, sensing her hesitation, leaned back in his chair and grinned. "I'll make you a deal," he said, his voice low but filled with playful confidence. "If you can impress me, I'll reward you handsomely. But if not, you owe me a drink." Lily hesitated for a moment. The room seemed to be holding its breath. Could she really do this? Play the piano in front of a room full of people, especially when she hadn't practiced in years. The challenge was unexpected, but something inside her told her to go for it. She agreed, and Richard waved a hand toward the grand piano in the corner of the room, urging her to take a seat. As Lily made her way toward the piano, she felt all eyes on her. The moment felt like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. But there was no turning back now. With every step she took, the excitement in the air seemed to grow. Would she succeed? Would the challenge turn into something extraordinary? Or would she fail, embarrassed in front of a room full of people who expected nothing less than perfection? This was the beginning of something unexpected. The room was about to witness something no one could have predicted. Richard, the millionaire businessman, was known for his eccentric ways, and tonight was no different. He had already earned a reputation in the city for being a man of unpredictable nature. At his table, laughter echoed as his friends and business associates engaged in animated conversations. The conversation was filled with stories about rich investments and high-risk ventures. Yet, there was something in the air tonight that felt different, almost electric, as Richard leaned back in his chair. Glancing around the room, he had always enjoyed testing people, pushing them out of their comfort zones just to see how they would react. It wasn't about making them uncomfortable, though. It was about seeing the unexpected unfold. Whether it was daring a guest to try something new or encouraging someone to confront their own limitations, Richard loved challenges. It was as if he thrived on unpredictability, always looking for a way to turn an ordinary evening into something thrilling. And that's when he saw her, Lily. The young waitress was making her rounds through the restaurant, her movements graceful and efficient. She was polite, friendly, but there was something about her that caught Richard's attention. It wasn't just her poise or the way she moved with ease through the bustling restaurant. It was something more, something genuine in her eyes. She seemed grounded, unaffected by the wealth and glamour that surrounded her. There was a spark of something in her that intrigued him. As she approached the table, Richard's usual mischievous grin appeared on his face. He leaned forward, locking eyes with her as she set down a fresh round of drinks. "Tell me, do you play the piano?" he asked, his voice smooth but with a hint of challenge. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring her to respond. Lily blinked for a moment, taken aback by the question. She wasn't sure if he was just making conversation or if he was truly serious. After all, most of the people who came into the restaurant were far too consumed with their own lives to pay attention to a waitress like her. But this was different. Richard's piercing gaze was intense, and the room had quieted for a brief moment. She knew this was no ordinary question. The room seemed to hold its breath. He wasn't asking out of politeness. He wanted to know, wanted her to either rise to the occasion or back down. It was one of those moments where you either step up or shrink away. After a brief pause, Lily laughed nervously. "Well, I used to," she said, her voice light. "But I haven't played in years." Richard's smile widened, sensing the opportunity in her hesitation. "What a shame," he teased, his tone light but with an undercurrent of challenge. "It's a pity, really. I bet you can't impress me, even if you tried." Lily could feel the heat of a blush creeping up her neck. She wasn't sure if it was the pressure of the situation or the playful challenge in his voice, but she couldn't help but feel a spark of determination flicker within her. Something about Richard's words sparked a rebellious streak deep inside her. Who was he to doubt her abilities? The table was now watching her closely, and she could feel the weight of their gazes. There was no going back now. She wasn't about to let this millionaire, with all his wealth and charm, get the better of her. This wasn't just about playing the piano anymore. It was about showing him that appearances weren't everything, and that she could do more than he expected. With a deep breath, she turned towards the grand piano that stood in the corner of the room. Its polished surface reflected the soft ambient light from the chandeliers above. It wasn't an ordinary piano. This was a grand, majestic instrument, one that would have intimidated anyone who didn't know how to play it well. Lily hesitated for a brief moment, her nerves rising again as she walked toward it. The last time she had played was when she was a child, practicing for recitals, dreaming of becoming a professional pianist. But that dream had long faded as life took her down a different path, one filled with bills, responsibilities, and a desire to finish her education. She had traded her piano lessons for waitressing shifts, her fingers growing rusty over time. But as she sat down at the piano bench, something unexpected happened. The nerves didn't fully go away, but they shifted into something else, something she could work with. A calmness settled in, as if the piano itself was offering her a way out of the awkwardness. She rested her fingers lightly on the keys, feeling the coolness of the ivory beneath her fingertips. Richard's eyes were still on her, but she didn't look up. She couldn't, not yet. The quiet anticipation in the room made her heartbeat thunder in her chest. Every second felt like an eternity as she thought about how to begin. Then, as if something inside her had clicked, her fingers moved. Slowly at first, then with more confidence, the notes began to form. She wasn't playing anything complex, just a simple, soft melody that she remembered from childhood. But the sound of the piano filled the room, quiet yet powerful, as if the music itself was casting a spell over the diners. Richard watched intently. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the music to touch him the way it did. It wasn't a perfect performance, but it was real. It was raw. The room that had once been filled with idle chatter and clinking glasses was now wrapped in silence. Each note seemed to stir something in the air, a feeling that this evening would be something more than just a challenge. This moment felt special. As Lily continued to play, a quiet murmur ran through the room, and the millionaire businessman, Richard, couldn't help but wonder, what was it about this young woman that made her so captivating? This was far from the outcome he had expected, and yet he was drawn in. The game was on. Lily's fingers trembled ever so slightly as they brushed the piano keys, and for a fleeting moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The music, soft and tentative, filled the space with an unexpected warmth. As the first few notes spilled from the piano, the entire atmosphere shifted. It was as though the air itself thickened, drawing everyone's attention to the girl seated at the grand instrument. Richard leaned back in his chair, still watching her intently. His gaze, though sharp and calculating, softened just a little. He hadn't anticipated this. He thought she would play a simple tune, maybe fumble a bit, and end up embarrassed. After all, he wasn't exactly a fan of being proven wrong. Yet, what was happening now was far beyond anything he had expected. He wasn't sure if he was amazed by her talent or the vulnerability she seemed to be sharing with the crowd. As Lily continued, the initial uncertainty began to fade. Her hands, once unsure, seemed to find their place on the keys. The melody, though simple, took on a life of its own, flowing, graceful, and full of emotion. It was almost as if she had tapped into something deeper, something that had been buried for years, only to come alive in that very moment that she could feel the weight of the room on her. Every eye was on her, every ear straining to hear the music. The nervousness that had plagued her just moments before started to melt away, replaced by something else, a sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, Lily wasn't just a waitress in a fine dining restaurant. She wasn't thinking about the tips or the long hours or the challenges she faced outside these walls. For those precious few minutes, she was a musician again, lost in the sound of the piano, lost in something that was entirely hers. Richard's eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and admiration. He hadn't expected her to be this good. He thought she would play a few clumsy notes and give up, but instead, Lily seemed to channel something far beyond her years. The music wasn't just beautiful. It was captivating. It was like watching someone awaken from a long slumber and finally find their voice. And the rest of the room? They, too, were stunned. The murmurs that had once filled the air had all but stopped. No one dared to make a sound, as if they were all afraid of breaking the spell she had cast over the room. Every note that rang out from the piano echoed with a quiet power, drawing them in like moths to a flame dot at the table where Richard sat. The energy shifted. His friends, who had been deep in conversation just moments ago, now stared in wide-eyed silence. The businessman, always so in control and so accustomed to making the rules, now seemed to be caught in something he couldn't control. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on Lily, unsure of what to do next. The challenge had gone far beyond his expectations. There was something about the way she played that felt effortless, like the piano had become an extension of herself. Her fingers glided over the keys as if they were dancing with each other, never missing a beat. The way she captured the music was mesmerizing. It wasn't the kind of performance that was showy or grand. It was raw, honest, and full of heart. But the truth was, Lily wasn't performing for the crowd. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't even thinking about the millionaire who had dared her to play. She had fallen into the music completely, like a river flowing with the current, carried along by something greater than herself. The world outside the piano faded away, and for that moment, she was just a girl playing the music she once loved. Richard could see it too. He saw the way she poured herself into each note, how every melody seemed to come from somewhere deep within her soul. The simplicity of it struck him. There was no pretension, no desire to show off. Just the music as it was, unfiltered and pure. For a brief moment, Richard was reminded of a time in his own life when he had felt something similar, when he was young and full of ambition. Chasing after dreams with the same passion Lily was now channeling into her music. He realized then that the challenge he had posed to her wasn't about testing her abilities, but about finding something he had long since lost. The room was now completely still. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the delicate music that seemed to wrap around them all, pulling them into a shared experience. Richard wasn't sure how long she had been playing. It felt like an eternity, but also like no time at all. He couldn't remember the last time he had been this captivated. This moved by something so simple, yet so powerful. Finally, as the final notes of the song hung in the air, Lily's fingers slowed and the music came to a quiet end. A silence filled the room, thick and heavy. It was as if everyone was afraid to move, as if the music was still lingering in the space, unwilling to let go. Then, as if on cue, the spell was broken. The applause was instant. It was a slow start, a few people unsure whether they were supposed to clap or not. But then, as if realizing what they had just witnessed, the applause grew louder and more heartfelt. Richard, who rarely showed anything close to vulnerability, stood up first, his hands clapping loudly. The others followed, and soon, the entire room was on its feet, applauding the young waitress who had just turned an ordinary evening into something extraordinary. Lily, stunned and overwhelmed by the response, looked up, her cheeks flushed with surprise. She hadn't expected this, not in a million years. But the applause wasn't just for the music. It was for the unexpectedness of the moment, for the raw, unfiltered emotion she had poured into her performance. In that brief moment, she had captured something that no one in the room would ever forget. The applause rang out like a wave crashing against the shore, loud and persistent, as if the entire room was caught in a collective moment of disbelief and admiration. But Lily could barely hear it. The sound of her heartbeat was all she could focus on as she sat there, still perched on the piano bench, her hands resting awkwardly on the keys. She blinked rapidly, her mind still reeling from the sheer magnitude of what had just happened. She hadn't expected this. In fact, she hadn't expected anything at all, just to play a few hesitant notes, and then retreat back into the shadows of the restaurant. But now, the room was erupting with applause. She could feel the heat in her cheeks, her stomach flipping as if the ground beneath her was shifting. Richard, of all people, was the first to stand. His tall frame towered above the table, his hands clapping with enthusiasm that startled her. He had been the one to challenge her in the first place. And now here he was, standing, his expression unreadable. But his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place: respect, maybe, or something else. He looked at her as if he had seen something in her that he hadn't expected. The rest of the room followed suit, rising to their feet, their applause growing louder by the second. The clapping was warm and genuine, not the polite applause you'd expect after a performance in a restaurant, but the kind that came when someone had just shown you something you weren't expecting. Something raw. Something real. Lily's fingers still rested on the piano, but her mind was miles away. She hadn't expected this moment, hadn't even dared to imagine it. But here it was, unfolding before her. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so exposed and yet so alive. Every single person in the room was watching her, some with wide eyes, others with smiles that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. The sound of clapping slowly faded, but it still hung in the air like a soft echo. And for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. It was as if time had stopped, just for a brief second, to give her a chance to process the enormity of what had just happened. Then, Richard stepped forward, his movements deliberate and measured. He was still smiling, but this time, it was different. The usual arrogance in his demeanor had softened, replaced by something far more sincere. His sharp eyes, which had once looked at her like a mere challenge to conquer, now seemed filled with admiration. "Now that," Richard said, his voice warm and full of surprise, "was something incredible." His words rang in the stillness, and Lily found herself looking up at him, unsure of what to say. Was he mocking her? Was this some kind of joke? But there was no trace of insincerity. He was speaking to her as if she had just performed on a world stage, as if she had done something that left him truly impressed. "I didn't think you had it in you," Richard continued, his grin widening as he looked down at her. "But I have to admit, I was wrong." Lily's hands shook slightly as she pulled them away from the keys, unsure of what to do next. She had never been the center of attention like this. Sure, she had been in front of customers at her job, but this was different. She had just revealed something to these people, something personal. The music had been a part of her long ago, and she had left it behind. But somehow, in that moment, it had all come rushing back, and she had shared it with an audience who hadn't even known what to expect. She hadn't known what to expect. The applause eventually died down, but the energy in the room remained electric, charged with an undeniable sense of awe. The millionaire businessman Richard, who had been so carefree in his challenge to her, now stood with his hands still clasped in a slow, appreciative clap. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Lily could hear. "That was ... incredible. You've got talent, real talent. You should do something with it," he said, his tone softer now, almost as if he were speaking to someone he respected, not just a waitress. Lily swallowed, her throat dry. She didn't know what to say. What could she say? She had never really thought of her piano playing as something worth pursuing. It was just a small part of her childhood, something she had given up long ago when life got in the way. But Richard's words made her pause. Something about the way he looked at her made her wonder if maybe she had been wrong all along. "I don't know ... She began, her voice hesitant. "I haven't played in years. It's just something I did as a kid. I'm not sure it's anything special." She couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. A waitress, someone who barely had time to think about her future, being told she had a future in music? It seemed almost impossible, but Richard wasn't convinced. He gave her a knowing smile, one that spoke volumes. "Don't sell yourself short. That was the kind of music people dream of hearing. Don't you ever think about taking it further. You've got the spark." Lily looked up at him, startled. Richard, a man who had everything in the world at his fingertips, was standing here telling her she had something special. It was so surreal. Before she could respond, the others at the table started talking, some still clapping, others chatting excitedly among themselves about what they had just witnessed. The buzz in the room grew louder, and Richard, sensing that the moment was slipping away, turned to his friends with a grin. "I think I've found a new star," he said, his voice full of mischief but with a hint of something else, a recognition, perhaps, that there was more to this night than just a simple challenge. As Lily sat there, processing the overwhelming flood of emotions, she realized that this night, this unexpected challenge, had shifted something inside her. She wasn't just the quiet, hard-working waitress anymore. For a brief moment, she had shared a part of herself with the world. And who knew? Maybe this was the beginning of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. The final note of the song lingered in the air like a faint echo, and the room held its breath for a split second longer before the applause erupted once again. Lily, still sitting at the grand piano, felt the rush of emotions flood over her: shock, disbelief, and a quiet, growing sense of pride. But even as the clapping surrounded her, it was as if she were in a dream. The room, once filled with the clatter of dinner plates and idle chatter, now seemed to exist in a completely different space. It was as if everything in the world had shifted, just for that brief, magical moment. She wasn't sure if she was the same person who had timidly agreed to play the piano mere minutes before. The applause grew louder, and with it, her realization deepened. She had done it. She had just played the piano in front of a room full of strangers, and not just played it, but played it well. Lily had been so lost in the music, so caught up in the melody, that she hadn't even thought about the people watching her, or what they might be thinking. But now, the reality of it settled in, and her cheeks flushed with a mixture of surprise and something else, something that felt like warmth spreading from her chest out to her limbs. Richard, standing at the front of the room, was clapping the hardest. He had been the one to challenge her in the first place, and as the applause began to die down, he stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. His gaze was intense but filled with something else, something unspoken. He hadn't expected this. No one had. Well, Richard said, breaking the silence with a smile that bordered on admiration. He placed his hands on the edge of the piano, leaning forward slightly. "I have to say, I'm impressed. I truly didn't expect that." Lily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She didn't know what to say. Was this real? She felt as if she had just crossed some invisible line, stepped into a world that didn't quite match the one she had been living in just moments before. "It's been a while since I played," she finally managed to say, her voice still a little shaky. Richard's smile softened, his expression now sincere. "A while? That was ... incredible. You made something so simple sound so beautiful. It's rare to hear someone play with that kind of feeling. You've got more talent than you know." Lily didn't know how to respond to that. Was he just being polite, or did he really mean it? The praise felt genuine, but she still wasn't sure she fully believed it. To her, she was still just the girl who had learned to play as a child, someone who had long since put that part of her life behind her. But the way Richard was looking at her, the way the rest of the room was looking at her, it made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had underestimated herself. As Richard continued to speak, his voice was filled with a quiet excitement. "You know, that kind of talent doesn't go unnoticed. You shouldn't let it just fade away. I can already tell that you could go far with the right opportunity." The words hit Lily like a tidal wave. She had been so focused on just getting by, on finishing her degree, paying her bills, trying to make ends meet, that she had never really thought about what she could do with her talent. It wasn't even on her radar. But now, hearing it from someone like Richard, it was hard to ignore. I don't know," she stammered. "I haven't played like that in years. And I've got my job here, school to worry about." Her voice trailed off, but Richard's expression didn't falter. He seemed genuinely convinced that she could do more. "You've got something special, Lily, something that most people would give anything to have. Don't let it slip away because you're busy with other things. You can make it work if you want to." She opened her mouth to protest, but before she could say anything, Richard continued. "Look, I'm in the business of making things happen. I can help connect you with people who could give you the opportunities you deserve. I'm not saying you need to drop everything and chase this now, but maybe you should consider it. Just think about it." Lily didn't know how to respond. Her life had always been about practicality, about getting through each day, each semester, without thinking too much about the future. Music had been a distant memory, a passion she had buried under the weight of her responsibilities. But now, standing here, hearing Richard's words, she couldn't help but wonder if she had been wrong all along. What if this was more than just a fluke? What if the music had never left her, and this was just the beginning of something bigger? The rest of the room seemed to buzz with excitement. People were still whispering about her performance, commenting on the surprising beauty of her playing. But Lily was no longer focused on them. She was lost in her thoughts, trying to grasp the reality of what Richard was offering her. "You could teach, or even perform. I could introduce you to some people who know what to do with talent like yours," Richard continued, as if sensing her hesitation. "And who knows? Maybe we could find a way to make this something more than just a one-time thing. You never know where a moment like this could lead." Lily felt a flutter of uncertainty in her chest. She had always been the practical one, the one who didn't entertain big dreams or wild ideas. She had learned early on that ambition could sometimes lead to disappointment. But here she was, being offered an opportunity that seemed too big to pass up. I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice still uncertain. She wasn't sure if she was ready to leap into something so unfamiliar, but part of her was curious. What if this was the chance she'd been waiting for without even knowing it? Richard gave her a knowing look. "That's all I ask. Just think about it. Talent like yours is rare, and you don't want to look back one day and regret not seizing it." Lily nodded, still unsure of what this all meant, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope deep inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the story. Perhaps it was only the beginning. The room was still buzzing with excitement, the air thick with the aftershocks of Lily's unexpected performance. It was as if the very walls of the restaurant had shifted, and a new energy had entered the space, a mix of disbelief, admiration, and the thrill of something unanticipated. The applause had tapered off, but the conversations were alive with hushed tones, all discussing the surprise that had just unfolded in front of them. Yet, amidst the chatter and the rising clink of glasses, Lily remained rooted to the piano bench, her fingers still resting on the keys. She wasn't sure what to do next. The applause had been overwhelming, and yet she felt oddly detached from it all. Her mind was spinning, trying to comprehend the flood of emotions she had just experienced. The familiar sound of her own heartbeat rang in her ears, as if she were still waiting for the world to return to its normal rhythm. But that wasn't happening. Not tonight. Not after what she had just done. Richard, always the center of attention, had stepped away from the piano, his voice once again commanding the room. "That was beyond incredible," he said, his words directed not just at Lily, but to the people who were now watching her in awe. "I've seen performances before, but that was something different." His voice carried through the room, and in an instant, the focus shifted back to him. The business deals, the chatter about investments, the regular dinner conversations all took a backseat to the electricity that still crackled in the air. Lily had captured the attention of an entire room, a room full of people who had once seen her as just another waitress. Now seeing her as something more. Richard was still speaking, but his eyes never left Lily. He was genuinely captivated. But there was something else in his gaze, too, something deeper. He wasn't just impressed by her ability to play the piano. It was the way she had taken control of the moment, the way she had commanded the attention of everyone present without even meaning to. It was as if she had awakened something inside him that he hadn't realized was dormant. The confidence she had shown, the talent that had poured out of her, it was undeniable, and yet, Lily couldn't escape the feeling that she was still floating outside of herself, watching it all unfold as if she were an observer rather than a participant. She had been in this restaurant for hours, just doing her job, never imagining that tonight would change everything. Never imagining that a simple challenge from a millionaire could turn into a life-altering experience. Richard, sensing her discomfort, took a step closer to her. His voice softened as he addressed her directly, not as a businessman or a challenger, but as someone who recognized potential. "You don't have to say anything now," he said. "But I want you to know that you've left a lasting impression on everyone in this room, including me." Lily finally pulled her hands away from the piano, feeling the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. She glanced around the room, catching the eyes of the diners who had once been focused on their meals, now locked in a collective gaze of awe. It was as if they had all just witnessed something magical, something that defied expectation. But for her, it felt like she had simply shared a part of herself, a part that had been hidden away for far too long. As the last traces of the applause faded, the chatter began to shift into new territory. People were no longer discussing the meal or the wine. They were talking about Lily. The tone was different now, less casual, less dismissive. There was respect in the way they spoke of her. Some of them had even begun to ask about her background, about her story. There were whispers of, "Where did she learn to play like that? And she must be classically trained, right?" But the questions didn't come with pity or condescension. They were genuine, filled with curiosity, as if her performance had opened up a world of possibilities for her that no one had thought to consider before. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone with potential, someone with a story that could lead to places far beyond the four walls of this rut. Lily stood up from the piano bench, her legs feeling a little unsteady, as if the ground beneath her was still shifting. Richard moved aside to let her pass, his eyes following her as she walked towards the edge of the room. She could hear the soft hum of conversation around her, but it all felt distant, as if she were in a bubble, separated from it all. She wasn't sure if she was ready for the attention, the questions, the expectations that seemed to be following her. But before she could retreat into the quiet of the kitchen, Richard called out to her, his voice clear above the rest. "Lily," he said, his tone warm and inviting. "I wasn't kidding when I said I could help you. You've got something special, and I know people who can help make this into something more. If you're serious about it, I can help connect you." His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Lily felt her breath catch. This wasn't just a fleeting compliment. It was an offer to help her step into something she had never truly considered: music, a career, a future beyond waitressing. She didn't respond right away. She wasn't sure if she was ready to accept anything. But Richard's gaze was unwavering, and something in his expression told her that he wasn't going to let this go. He saw something in her, something she hadn't even seen in herself. And that, more than anything, made her stop and think. The room was still buzzing, but now it felt like it was waiting for her to make a decision. It wasn't just about playing piano anymore. It was about what came next. What was she going to do with this moment, this chance, this unexpected opportunity? Lily took a deep breath and turned back toward Richard. "I'll think about it," she said quietly, but with a newfound determination. "I will." The room fell silent for just a heartbeat, and in that moment, everything seemed to change. It wasn't just the music that had captivated them, it was the person she was becoming. The night was far from over, but Lily could already feel that everything had changed. The applause, the shock, and the lingering tension of the challenge had all receded into the background, replaced by a quiet, almost surreal clarity. She stood there, still trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just unfolded. The room, which had once felt so large and intimidating, now seemed smaller, more familiar. It was as if she had stepped out of the shadows and into the light. And now everyone was waiting for her to make sense of it. Richard had already turned his attention back to his table, where his friends were discussing something else. But his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before he offered a subtle nod of approval. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a small gesture, but to Lily, it felt monumental. Richard Harrington, a man who could buy whatever he wanted, who had the world at his fingertips, had just recognized something in her. And for the first time in years, she felt like maybe she wasn't just a waitress anymore. Maybe she wasn't just a student trying to scrape by. Maybe, just maybe, she was someone worth noticing. As the evening wore on, the hum of conversation returned, but it was different now. The people around her weren't talking about the meal or the wine, they were talking about her. They were sharing opinions, asking questions, wondering about her background. Lily overheard snippets of conversations as she made her way back toward the kitchen, still reeling from the unexpected shift. Where did she learn to play? She must be a professional, right? Lily tried to ignore them, but their words echoed in her head. Professional? The idea seemed almost laughable. She had never thought of herself that way. Sure, she had taken piano lessons when she was younger, but she'd given it all up years ago. It had been a distant dream, a part of her childhood that hadn't survived the weight of responsibility. And yet, here she was, being treated like someone with a future in music. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. The usual rhythm of her job, taking orders, delivering drinks, and clearing tables, felt somehow offbeat, as if her mind was still caught in the whirlwind of the piano performance. But beneath the surface of her busy tasks, a question continued to gnaw at her. What now? She couldn't stop thinking about Richard's offer. "You've got something special, Lily," he had said. "You could go far." The words replayed in her mind over and over, and for the first time in a long time, she wondered if maybe he was right. Could she really make something of her music? Was there a place for someone like her, someone who had buried a childhood dream beneath the demands of adulthood? The kitchen felt smaller than usual as Lily moved in and out, preparing the last few orders of the night. Her co-workers noticed her distracted demeanor, but didn't ask questions. They had no idea what had just happened, what she had just experienced. All they knew was that she was quiet, her movements a little slower than usual. At the end of her shift, she stepped outside into the cool, night air. The city stretched out before her, its lights flickering in the distance. She took a deep breath, trying to ground herself. The world felt different now, and for once, she wasn't sure if she liked it. But then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Richard. She pulled it out, her heart racing just a little. "Lily, I know you're probably still processing everything, but I meant what I said tonight. If you ever want to talk about opportunities, or just explore the possibilities, I'm here. Don't let tonight be the end of the story. You've got talent that deserves to be seen." She read the message again, then again. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. What was he expecting from her? Was he offering her something real, or was he just toying with her, seeing if she would bite? But as the doubt crept in, another thought followed quickly behind. What if he was serious? What if this could be the chance I've been waiting for? She stared at the screen for a long time, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. There was no easy answer, no clear path ahead. She couldn't ignore the reality of her life, the bills, the responsibilities, the sacrifices. But what if this was more than just a fleeting moment? What if this was the start of something bigger? Lily's thumb hovered over the keyboard, and for the first time in years, she felt a surge of courage. She wasn't ready to jump headfirst into a new life, but maybe she didn't need to make a huge leap. Maybe she just needed to take one small step. Her fingers typed slowly, but with growing confidence. "Thank you, Richard. I'll think about it. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm willing to explore what's out there." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The reply came quickly. "Good, let's talk soon. You won't regret this." Lily looked up at the city skyline, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear swirl in her chest. She had no idea where this would lead, or if it would even lead anywhere at all. But for the first time, she was allowing herself to believe in the possibility. Maybe she had more control over her future than she had thought. Maybe the girl who had once hidden behind the piano keys, too shy to take up space in the world, was ready to step into the light. The city felt a little smaller now, a little more within reach. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The following weeks blurred by in a haze of uncertainty, but also with a strange, exhilarating energy that Lily couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the aftermath of that unforgettable night at the restaurant. It was more like the lingering hum of possibility. Richard's words, so casually delivered, but laden with something deeper, had stayed with her, pushing her to confront something she had long buried, the idea that she could have a life beyond the limits she had set for herself. Her shifts at the restaurant continued. Of course. The bills didn't stop coming, and neither did the long hours of work. But each time she sat down at the piano to play for herself during breaks or in the privacy of her apartment, she felt a connection to something she hadn't realized was still there. Music had never left her. It had just been waiting for her to remember it. And then, one evening, just as she was getting ready to head to work, Richard's message came again. This time it was more direct. "I've got an opportunity for you. A meeting with a producer who's looking for fresh talent. If you're serious, this could be the start of something. Are you in?" She stared at the message for a long time, the weight of it sinking in. She had expected Richard to be persistent, but this was different. He wasn't just offering advice anymore. He was offering her a chance, a tangible opportunity that could change everything. It was no longer a game or a casual suggestion. It was a door, and all she had to do was walk through it. The decision was harder than she thought. For the first time, Lily felt the pull of her dreams and the responsibility of her reality clash in a way that felt almost too much to bear. She had worked hard for everything she had. She had learned to survive by keeping her dreams small, by accepting the limitations life had given her. But now, there was an opportunity that threatened to upend all of that. Would she risk it? Would she risk everything she had worked for, her stability, her routine, for something uncertain, something as fragile as hope? The minutes ticked by, and Lily found herself pacing around her small apartment. The walls, once so familiar, suddenly felt constricting. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and excitement, pushing her in two different directions. She was so used to playing it safe, staying within her comfort zone. But what if staying in that zone meant never truly living? She didn't want to be a small part of her own story anymore. Taking a deep breath, Lily finally tapped out her response. "I'm in." She hit send before she could change her mind. The reply came quickly. "Good, it's happening tomorrow. I'll send you the details." The next day, Lily found herself standing in front of a sleek, modern building, the kind that looked like it belonged to a high-end music studio or a corporate headquarters. The city's skyline loomed above, towering and indifferent, and for the first time, Lily felt like she was truly a part of it. This was real. This was her chance. She stood there for a moment, just breathing in the air, taking in the enormity of what she was about to do. She had never been to a place like this before, never imagined she would be here, in this moment, with all these questions swirling around her. She wasn't a professional musician. She wasn't anyone special. Or so she thought. But now, as she looked up at the building, she knew that she was no longer the person she had been. She walked through the glass doors with a sense of determination she didn't know she had. Inside, the space was sleek and professional, filled with the soft hum of creativity. There were people rushing around, making phone calls, arranging things, but in the midst of the chaos, she spotted Richard waiting for her. He was standing near a group of people who looked like they could have been anyone from producers to talent scouts. He waved her over with a smile, his usual confidence unmistakable. "You made it," he said, his eyes gleaming. "This is it. You're about to meet someone who could change everything for you." Lily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This was no longer just a dream. It was happening. She had made the decision. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was going to take this chance. She was going to step into the unknown and see where it took her. Richard led her to a room where a well-dressed man was waiting behind a desk. He looked up as they entered and gave her a sharp but welcoming smile. "Lily," he said, standing to shake her hand. "I've heard a lot about you. Richard tells me you've got something special." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Lily felt a flutter in her stomach. She could barely believe it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, but it didn't feel real. It felt like she was still standing on the outside, looking in. But then, something shifted. Maybe it was the way Richard was watching her, or the way the producer's eyes seemed to sparkle with curiosity. Whatever it was, it made her realize that this was her time. For the first time, she didn't hold back. She was no longer the hesitant waitress or the unsure girl who had buried her dreams. She was someone with a future ahead of her. She was going to fight for. The producer gestured to a grand piano in the corner of the room. "Why don't you show me what you've got?" he asked, his voice calm but expectant. Lily took a deep breath and walked toward the piano. She sat down, her fingers finding the keys with ease. The notes flowed through her, as if the piano had been waiting for her to return, just like she had been waiting for this moment to arrive. There was no hesitation now. No doubt. She played like she had never stopped, like this was exactly where she was meant to be. And as the music filled the room, she felt something inside her shift, something deeper than just the music itself. This was her beginning. The start of a new chapter. The start of a life she had almost given up on. The room was silent as the last note echoed through the space. And for a moment, Lily held her breath. Then the producer smiled, and Lily knew this was only the beginning.